and then you may answer questions from them. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a hall. You can see the hall. They are coming in. They are already there, waiting for
I see. Yes,
lecture.
a big hall, lecture room.
Okay. When it's 3 o'clock, I would like to introduce you to my professors and students, and then you start your lecture. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, now it is 3 o'clock. We are honored to have the professor from Uzbekistan, Mamurjon Rahimov, who finished the undergraduate and the master's at say, you got the master degree at the University of the Illinois, Chicago.
University of Illinois, Chicago, yes.
And the bachelor from which university? It was in Georgia?
Bachelor's from Emory University, Atlanta, Georgia.
University,
Emory, yes.
Yeah, you spent 8 years in United States? 10 years?
Almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years
in the United States.
Okay.
Yes.
And he is now teaching at the Westminster University in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Today his lecture will be about understanding the developing countries. Okay, yeah, now it's your turn. Okay.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Uzbekistan. Thank you, Professor An. Thank you, Handong Global University, for inviting to this event as a speaker. Professor Bamaji, now I see you. It's great to see you, Professor Bamaji. I sent my slides yesterday, but I worked on them more last night. I polished them, so I have updated one, so I'll share that with you right now. You may send your questions as we go in the chat. So if there is some clarification, or if the sound is not good, I can see and respond. I'll try to fix that. Can you hear me well? I'm checking the sound. Is the sound okay?
Sound is okay.
All right, the sound is okay. Thank you very much. I'm about to share my screen. Just give me a few seconds here.
Yes, we can see your videos and the PowerPoint. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Okay.
Right. So the topic for today, welcome to the lecture on understanding of the developing countries. What are the opportunities? I traveled to quite a lot of developed countries and developing countries, but I spent enough time to understand the United States. I spent almost 10 years in the United States as a student, as a teacher there, as a lecturer of economics. And since I returned from the United States, I've been living in Uzbekistan. It's already 12 years I've been in Uzbekistan. So I almost have the same amount of time that I can compare. And since this time I was already a researcher and already a lecturer. So I may talk a little bit about, I may mention about something about Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, the countries that I visited, my neighboring Kyrgyzstan and Russia. But I would like to concentrate more on United States and Uzbekistan, just the contrast between the United States and Uzbekistan. As Professor An mentioned, I have 2 degrees from the United States. The first one is bachelor's degree. I went there on scholarship, and it was fully paid. Everything was paid for me, my living expenses, food, books, separate allowance for books, and it was a full scholarship. So we lived there like princes for almost 3 years, completing bachelor's degree in business. So And when I returned to the United States for the second time as a self-paying student, I realized that I spent 3 years in the United States and I didn't get to know the country. So my master's years, my education in Chicago and my work in Chicago, because I was a self-paying student, I had to make a living. I had to work extra hours on campus and off campus. So I got to know the United States much better, and I lived not on campus, I lived off campus in a suburban neighborhood. So I interacted with neighbors. Here's a short outline. We already did the introduction to the topic, right? So introduction to the topic, we're going to understand the developing countries, particularly in the case of Uzbekistan. In contrast, some of the things that will contrast with the United States. This second bullet point is more philosophical. So 2 ways to live life. So and then we're going to contrast the 2 countries. We're going to look at the GDP per capita, whether it is a good measure of human well-being, because we study all these economic subjects in the sciences, finance, economics, marketing, management, in order to improve our standard of living, right? So it boils down to human well-being. And we'll briefly talk about other alternative measures of human well-being, such as gross national happiness, introduced by a small country, Bhutan. Different way to look at things, and we'll, in the end, some conclusion and takeaways. And I hope we'll have some time for discussion and feedback. Are we ready? Shall we go?
Yeah.
Thank you. So just a quick definition. So an adage is a saying often in metaphorical form, typically embodies a common observation. So worldwide, different nations have different adages.
와인 자체가 상향이
Please mute your microphones. Yes. So one great man said that metaphor is like a novel in condensed form. It's a metaphor is a novel. It's a full novel, but it's in a very short format. So my close friend Manfred Ferstel from Germany, Munich, he used to say, when we were studying at Emory, he used to say that there are basically 2 ways to live your life. First is big fish in a small pond, or as a small fish in a big pond. And by pond we mean the lake, right? Small lake. So, and at that time I didn't pay much attention, but it was very meaningful and interesting and memorable. So you see, you have 2 ways to live your life. So it's your choice. You're students here. You're graduating soon, and you have to make your choices whether to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond. So, and I started asking myself, and I recommend you the same. Are you a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? Okay. So United States is it a big pond, right? So how do we know? It's a big country, of course, with the largest GDP in the world. And then who am I, right? As someone who's has 2 degrees from the United States. So I thought about, who am I if the USA is a big pond? So am I one of the small fish? And I really didn't like the idea of being a small fish. Especially like in a marketing sense, there are so many marketing graduates in the United States from top schools that I'm no match to many of them. From Yale, Harvard, MIT, some of the best schools. And the same thing we can say about economists. So it was very hard to compete for jobs there, especially when the crisis hits. Right, with that the world experiences. So Uzbekistan, is it a small pond? Then who am I, right? So beautiful, nice pond where, you know, even this relatively small fish, they look like very big because of the size, right? Everything is relative. So this is me. Decide if you want to be a big fish in a small pond, and I thought this is a good idea. You know, if I return to Uzbekistan, I'll become a big fish in a small pond, meaning that there are not so many graduates of marketing programs and economics programs from United States, especially when I came back from the United States the first time. You know, I was the only guy in my town who studied abroad, but now there are more. But my experience is growing. You know, I'm not only teaching, I'm also consulting different businesses. So until quite recently, I thought I was a big fish in a small pond, mostly from HR perspective. But then, you know, we have at Westminster University, we had a guest speaker. He's a good friend of mine. We still keep in touch on Facebook. This is Anders Lassen. He's a marketing manager at Carlsberg. So Carlsberg has a joint venture in Uzbekistan near Tashkent. So he said a very interesting thing. You know, he said that in Europe, most markets are saturated. In developed countries, saturated meaning they're all taken, right? They're full of players, major players. Market shares are pretty much clear, you know, divided among major players of the countries. Everyone is watching each other's move. For example, for marketers, there is not much to do. You know, you go to office and you snooze, you sleep. And in contrast, he said, in Uzbekistan, most markets are open. They are not captured fully by international companies, or, you know, there are very few giant companies in Uzbekistan. So for market, there is so much opportunity to grow and do new things. So he said, action is here. You know, that made me think, wow. So I did not appreciate this part of this developing country, right? So he was saying in developed countries, there is not much to do. The markets are already divided. So managers, they go, they do small things, tiny decisions. There are no major, you know, breakthroughs in many years. But this is a developing market. Professor An and Professor Bamaji probably recognize this one. This is a huge dome at Chorsu market. This is spice, mostly spices are sold here. And you see how the market, you know, is so full, and there's so much opportunities to grow and trade. So GDP per capita, you all know that, and it's most often it's shown as a measure of economic well-being, achievement of economic achievement of the country. But many economies, they argue that GDP per capita is not an accurate measure of national well-being. The reason I put the Bedouins here with camels, you know, I also like history. You know, I'm an interdisciplinarian scholar, let's say. So when I studied history, I learned that Arabs, not now, but centuries ago, Arabs had this tradition. So if the caravan was going on a desert, and of course every let's say traveler had his own ration, right? Some water and some food. And then the caravan sometimes got lost because of the, you know, there was no GPS, and you know, sometimes they took the wrong route and they got lost in the desert. So what the, you know, Bedouins, Arab Bedouins would do, they would actually, you know, some people would run out of water quickly. Some people would have more water than less food. So they would gather all of their, you know, food and water and divide equally among each other. So that is the closest thing to GDP per capita that, you know, existed. But nowadays, no country gathers all their, products and services they produce in 1 year, put in one place, divide equally among all the citizens. This is a very theoretical concept. Therefore, there are some alternative measures of, identifying human well-being developed by different scholars in different countries. So one of them is Gross Happiness Index, developed in Bhutan. They have a special center for measuring this. So it was introduced by His Majesty the 4th King of Bhutan in 1970s. And as the term suggests, it implies that sustainable development should take a holistic approach towards the notion of progress, not just look at the only economic side. Although this Gross Happiness Index, it contains some economic pillars as well, it looks at more aspects of human life. So, for example, they have come up with 4 pillars of gross national happiness. So they divide it into sustainable and equitable socioeconomic development, good governance at both corporate level and country level, preservation and promotion of culture, environmental conservation, right? So, and then they break this down to smaller domains, right? These 4 pillars are broken down into smaller domains. I'm not going to go in depth of discussing all these things. Just the fact that even after they introduced gross national happiness, alternative measures of happiness appeared, show that this is far from perfect from measuring human happiness. So in Bhutan, they even have gross national happiness center. They measure their own gross national happiness according to these domains, and they try to do the same with other countries. So Bhutan, since then, it's known as a kingdom of happiness. They look at, they take happiness very seriously, but according to World Happiness Report, which is developed mainly by looking at the data of Gallup polls, right? Global polls of Gallup. Bhutan is ranked 95th in the world, right? So this is really bad, and I posted the link for the article, and the article discusses why, they invented the measure of happiness, but another group of scholars, they came up with a different way of measuring happiness and show that Bhutan is not doing so well. So if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, right? SDGs of the United Nations as well, more than half of these development goals, they concentrate on non-economic aspects of human well-being. Now, I would like to go to some aspects of human well-being that here with my colleagues we've been discussing, and just Professor An, he speeded up this process. Maybe eventually we'll turn this into a paper, but I'm going to give you some numerical and qualitative information to feel the difference between developed and developing countries. This is about United States. The reference is given below. So, this is percentage of debt-free people, right? So if you compare 2 countries, if we just zoom in, we have to look at the percentage of debt-free people. In the United States, according to Forbes, the total just education debt, right? This is education loans, amount to $1.6 trillion, which is equal to GDP of a large country. So there are 45 million borrowers who collectively own this amount, and For example, 2018 graduate, the class of 2018, they owe banks and financial institutions about $30,000. When I was in the United States, I knew some of my colleagues at 40 and 50 years of age, they were still paying their loans, which they got when they were 18. This is a huge, how to say, negative thing for economy, because this payment takes away from disposable income of the population. Another one, and this is the largest one, right? So the education loans in developed countries, particularly in the United States, they are number 2 after mortgage debt, right? According to statistics, approximately $16 trillion is the amount of total mortgage outstanding in the United States, right? People, you know, when they die, they pass on the mortgage to their children and their families. So even many families, they do not pay off their debt during their lifetimes. Now, we developed this spider web diagram to compare United States and Uzbekistan, developed country versus a developing country. And we named the axis, some of these you've seen already. I'll start with opportunity to make a living, right? So opportunity to make a living, what do we mean by this? For example, in Uzbekistan or some countries like Uzbekistan, the transnational capital hasn't taken over the country yet. You know, for almost 30 years, Uzbekistan remained to be, you know, closed country with currency controls and, you know, a lot of checks on foreign direct investment. So transnational capital, also known as quicksilver capital, hasn't taken over our economies, our lives. For example, I'm in my small town. I'm from a small town in the easternmost province of Uzbekistan. So if I want to open, let's say, oil change place for servicing cars, I could, you know, take my savings, rent a place, and you know, rent equipment and start it in a short period of time, because there are no international franchises who take over the city's oil change market. So there are millions of cars in Uzbekistan, but there are no franchise oil change places. The same we can say about the restaurant business or hotel industry. Most of these businesses, they're locally owned. They are not franchises, and that allows small, medium, and even large corporations a lot of room to expand, a lot of room to create more jobs, well-being of the people. Next thing on the right side is social networking. I'm talking about offline social networking. You know, according to this scholars, average person, he closely interacts with 150 people in his or her lifetime. You know, 150 people. That during your lifetime you are close with 150 people, friends, colleagues, and your relatives, right? So Uzbeks, they're very close. Well, you know, socially they're very close, and they support each other, and they, because it's also related to opportunity to make a living. They help each other with finances. They help each other with living while you are collecting for a new house. So the green line there is Uzbekistan. So it's a high opportunity to make a living and high social networking. And the United States is red. It's low opportunity to make a living because most of the economic life is controlled by corporations, by franchises, by transnational capital. Same thing we can say about offline social networking. You know, the economic life is so demanding. People don't have time to visit relatives and friends. And you know, another thing on the opposite side, you see the transportation cost as well. Transportation cost domestic within the country. It also affects the social networking opportunities offline. So we'll come to this as well. So the next thing here is, just a moment, percentage of debt-free people, right? We briefly talked about that in above slides, but here in Uzbekistan, percentage of debt-free people is very high. I can count with my fingers the number of my friends and relatives who have mortgage. I can count with my fingers how many of my close friends and relatives have mortgage. And this is highly helped by high interest rates for mortgage. You know, average mortgage rate in Uzbekistan is like 20%, annual 20% mortgage. So many people still prefer to borrow from relatives. They collect money and buy, because there's closely social network. They can live with their parents, they can live with their brothers and sisters while they're collecting the money. You know, in the United States, there was a internet companies advertising, and it said that I would rather move in with my parents than lose my internet connection. I'll repeat. So the advertising, the catch, you know, the tagline at the end, the catchphrase was, I would rather move in, you know, move in with my parents than lose my internet connection, because it's like a taboo. You know, living with parents in the United States, it means that you know, you didn't achieve anything in life. You know, friends and relatives, they look bad at you. Whereas you know, in developing countries, this is considered to be normal. And actually, siblings, they fight for the right to stay with the parents, because the parents usually choose the best one to live with them. The others, they move out, right? As the time comes, as they build their house and they collect enough money, they move out. So the social taboos have been developed in the developed countries, that they actually make people detest social networking, especially with their close relatives. So therefore, percentage of debt-free people is very high in Uzbekistan, but the percentage of debt-free people in the United States is very low. Americans, they borrow money for a car, they borrow money for the house, they borrow money for the education. So when the hard times come, like this, what we experience today, you know, the pandemic or financial crisis, it's like Cinderella. You know, Americans, they're like Cinderellas, you know, because they cannot pay for the mortgage, they lose the house. They cannot pay for the car, they lose the car. And then, you know, they have to go, you know, they go bankrupt. You know, that's why in many developed countries, the suicide rates, they're very high, especially during the crisis, this spikes, right? So the next one is non-bank household savings. You know, when our banks crash, you know, you know, it's not so much big deal as in South Korea or United States or other developed countries, because we have non-bank household savings. Uzbekistan, you know, Uzbek people and many people in developing countries, they do not trust their commercial banks. Especially look at our Kazakhstan. You know, they every day, almost every day, a commercial bank shuts down. You know, and they cannot pay their debts. What's happening in Kyrgyzstan next door? You know, commercial banks, they are not able to pay the depositors. So most people, they keep their savings as non-bank households. They buy cars, they buy sometimes some people buy gold and silver, or the most popular is US dollars. They keep the US dollars. So in most liquid form, right? And also land, you know, people buy land. So because land, that leads us to the next thing, you know, United States is low on non-bank household savings. During the pandemic, we had the bank run, you know, we had the bank run. I wrote about this to Professor An, but during the bank run, most people did not go to withdraw their savings. They went to exchange their local currency to American dollar because the exchange rate of dollar sharply increased during the pandemic, early stages of the pandemic. So that leads to food security. So in Uzbekistan, food security is at the government policy level. This has been, you know, government has been paying attention since the independence to food security by allocating land for people to grow their food. You know, and even people in their own backyards, there is a tradition to plant fruit trees, you know, vegetables. This is like part of culture and provides food security. While in the United States, in many states and cities and ordinances, there are laws that prohibit Americans from growing their own food. You have to get permission, and in many cities, you are not allowed to grow your food on your own land. You have to grow the grass, you know, the lawn. It should be the lawn. It all has to look nice. So, and when the crisis hits, you don't have something to lean on. So Uzbeks, that's why food prices are still much lower than in developed countries, even though it's increasing as economic difficulties nowadays because of the pandemic. But it's food security is at a higher level than in developed countries like United States, in many European countries. Now we go to the transportation cost. Here, the Uzbekistan transportation cost is low. For example, bus ride in Uzbekistan or the train or the subway ride is about 15 cents. And in the United States, it's about $2 for a bus ride. And keeping in mind that most of the users of the public transportation, they're working class, mid to low income people. So they, in developed countries, they spend considerable amount of their disposable income on transportation, which is closely connected to social networking, with the offline social networking, and opportunities to grow, right? Opportunities to make a living. We're almost done here, and I'll give the floor to for comments and questions. Bear with me. So the next one is percentage of home ownership. Fully paid off percentage of home ownership. It's in United States, it used to be very high as well, but because Americans, they use their houses as ATM machines, many of them, they lost their houses, and nowadays majority of Americans, they have to live off rent, or they have to pay mortgage for lifetime, right? But percentage of home ownership in Uzbekistan and many developing countries is still very high. So during economic hardships, they're not left homeless. They still have a roof over their head, and they have close social relations with relatives. So it's a more recession-proof economies when it comes to this kind of difficult periods of time. Next is peace of mind. Because of this, you know, when you wake up in the morning in a developing country, the peace of mind is much higher. So the suicide rates are lower, much lower than in developed countries. There's, you know, even if you lose a job, because of your social networking, because of opportunities to make a living, it's possible to start a small business from scratch. It's possible to find a new job using your social networks. So this completes our spiderweb diagram, and here we are contrasting, with the green line. The green line is again Uzbekistan, and the dotted line is the United States. Having said that, now I'm feeling, when I'm thinking about that saying about big fish and small fish in the pond, I say maybe there is option 3. So maybe I still feel like a big fish, but I feel that there are so many opportunities here. So Uzbekistan doesn't seem like a small pond anymore. So I feel like I'm a big fish in a big pond with lots of opportunities. Thank you very much for your attention. That was the end of my lecture. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and we can turn to questions or comments. Please. Yeah, Professor An, you can unmute. Maybe you will comment first.
Okay, after taking a look at the diagram, I want you to explain more about the opportunity to make a living. In many developing countries, even though people are employed, they are sometimes underemployed, or sometimes they are, say, marginally employed, so that they cannot earn enough earnings to support their families or himself or herself. So
Right.
even though in the developing countries, as you mentioned, there are opportunities, but the opportunity itself is not substantial to support the family or himself or herself. Okay.
Thank you for the comment, Professor An. You have a very good point there. You see, this in one way, this pandemic was a blessing for developing countries, especially. Why? Because all this surplus labor, because of there are opportunities to make a living, but because of lack of government involvement, maybe a lack of legal frameworks and maybe economic support from the side of government, many people could not connect with this economic opportunities. The opportunities are there, but most people, because of the lack of education, lack of skills, they couldn't connect to this. That's why, when we discuss this many times with you, that we need business incubators here. So for people to realize these economic opportunities, to make a living and acquire skills in a short period of time to start, capturing this opportunity. So there is a very popular saying that success is when preparation meets opportunity. In developing countries, opportunities are there, but preparation is not. The higher education is, right now it's improving thanks to, government permission to more international universities, but our state universities, they're far behind in knowledge and providing skills to capture these opportunities. So what I said that this, in a way, this was this pandemic was a blessing for developing countries like Uzbekistan, because for example, according to some independent statistics, we had between 3 to 5 million able-bodied men, mostly men, working in Russia alone. Between 3 and 5 million people every year, they go to Russia because economic opportunities in Uzbekistan are hard to capture, because the legal framework is not there, and the network, what do we say, ecosystem is not there to prepare people to capture these economic opportunities. So this kind of government was saved from helping these people to find these economic opportunities and realize these economic opportunities. Now, most of them, they're back because of the pandemic, because a lot of construction, a lot of manufacturing in Russia has stopped. Now, government officials, their #1 job is becoming to help these low-skilled people to realize the economic opportunities that still exist in the country. I hope I was able to answer your question, Professor Han.
Okay, and second question is about food security. The diagram, information in the diagram, it may be true for the Uzbekistan, but if I take a look at developing countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America, so many countries, they do not have the food security in terms of the, say, hygiene, in terms of the sanitations, in terms of the quality. You know,
Yes, yes.
according to the FAO, the FAO, you know, the most of the, say, food is not enoughly supplied to the peoples in the developing countries, and also sometimes they, even though they can consume the food, but the foods are not clean enough. So
Yes.
what you say about the conclusion about the food security, it may be quite different in many developing in general, in developing countries in general, I think.
Yes, I agree with you because there are many, especially in Africa, you know, there most of the land, even our neighboring Tajikistan, you know, more than half of their land is just mountains. You cannot grow much there. But again, you know, that's why I try to focus it only on Uzbekistan, because I know Uzbekistan best. So in Uzbekistan, government did what Cuba did many years ago. You know, when Cuba was facing economic sanctions and embargoes, one of the government policies in Cuba, they said, government told people to start planting food on any land they can find. So Cubans, they were saved from starvation because they were allowed to take over any land which was available and start planting something, right? So Uzbekistan did something like this when we became independent, and you know, Uzbekistan had 2 weeks worth of flour left for bread. We had long bread lines and everything. When Uzbekistan became independent, you know, there were times that we had, the whole country had about 2 weeks worth of bread, which is our main sustenance. You know, we eat more bread than rice, right? Rice is our #2. So then Uzbekistan government, they allocated small plots of land to rural, you know, people in rural areas so they could plant something. And, you know, because factories were shut down, all the supply, logistics was shut down in the, after collapse of Soviet Union. So the people were able to survive on planting different kinds of produce on these small plots of land. And this policy is still continuing nowadays. Uzbekistan is repeating this now during the pandemic, you know, because there are a lot of youth who could not go to Russia, Kazakhstan, or South Korea and Turkey to make a living. So government is allocating them, you know, half an acre of land or 1 acre of land, and giving small bank loans for them to buy a water pump, for example, if the water is not available there, or buy some, you know, seeds and stuff. So it is repeating the policy which has set on after collapse of Soviet Union. Yes.
Any questions from student or professors? From Uzbek side?
From Uzbek side, I see Oybek Hojimamatov. He asked, what is peace of mind, all right? Peace of mind is a kind of a
dependent variable, right? It's like all other things on our diagram, we can say it's an independent variable, but peace of mind comes from food security, having a place to stay, having social backup when you have difficulty, you know, having economic opportunities to make a living, right? This is kind of a collective indicator. So Uzbekistan and many developing countries, they have higher peace of mind, which is shown that, you know, developed countries like South Korea have some of the highest suicide rates. Suicide rates, they're the best. This is an indicator that those people have not enough peace of mind. And when Uzbeks, we pray, or after, you know, when we pray after food, or when we start food, we always pray for peace of mind. This is what our number one thing, which is the result of so many other factors combined. Oybek, I hope I was able to answer your question. I'm expecting questions from our Korean students. I know most of you have never visited Uzbekistan, but after this pandemic is over, you are invited to Uzbekistan. I'll meet you at the airport. There are so many Koreans, you know, Uzbek Koreans in Uzbekistan, so I'm sure you will feel at home. And our culture is very similar. We are very welcoming. And Uzbek food is very popular among the Koreans who have been to Uzbekistan.
In terms of language, language structure is very similar to Korean language.
Absolutely. My second daughter is now learning Korean language, and recently when we were driving, when I was driving her to school, she could translate Korean pop, simultaneously translate Korean pop into English from Korean. So Korean language is one of the most popular languages, foreign languages in Uzbekistan, because you know, a lot of people are now finding you know, education opportunities in South Korea and job opportunities. So even in small towns, there are language centers to teach Korean. Small towns, not just capital of Tashkent. You know, small town with 25,000 people, they have a language center, several language centers teaching Korean language.
Okay. Any questions from Korean student?
Korean students, they are usually known as very shy. I know them. I visited South Korea several times, thanks to Professor An's invitation. I was invited this summer, but then the pandemic decided to continue much longer. Hopefully next year I'll be able to visit your wonderful country again and learn more from Korean ways of management and marketing and government policy. There are many things that we need to learn from Koreans, especially the hardworking and imagination. You know, about the business incubators, we did the research. This was a couple of years ago, of course. There was a research, for example, about business incubators. There are in United States. United States is a home of business incubators. There are more than 1,000 business incubators in the United States, and a lot of startups they begin there. In China, there are more than 500 business incubators. In South Korea, more than 260 business incubators. In Uzbekistan, we have business incubators in name only. We still need to learn how to establish and how to run business incubators so that our youth, especially your youth, can capture the business opportunities which are available in our country and neighboring countries.
You know, in terms of the ratio of the, say, expenditure on the research and development over the GDP, which is number one on the earth, Korea is number one on the earth.
Wow.
We're spending a lot of money on research and development.
Absolutely.
Questions?
You can type your questions, or you can they unmute themselves? Maybe they're asking questions that I cannot hear.
Yeah,
Can I
you can
ask
type
a
in.
question?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Hi, Professor. I hope you remember me from the Webster University. Yes.
Hello, how are you?
I'm a
Yes, I
citizen of
remember you. Not that-
Uzbekistan. Yes. And I'm really glad to see you again. Thanks for the lecture, for your presentation. It was interesting.
Thank you very much.
And as a citizen of Uzbekistan, you know, I want to ask about the debt. So because actually I'm also a debt-free person. I try to follow this approach in my life.
Right.
As most Uzbekistan citizens, yes. And but I understand that as a developing country, we cannot live actually and develop so fast without borrowings, unfortunately. That's why for the last several years, our country has borrowed pretty much from the World Bank and from Asian Bank.
Yes.
You are well know about this.
Yes. Yes, of course.
So the question is actually this. What do you think is the future for Uzbekistan in terms of debt? Would be our country be able to return the loans, and
Yes.
or the burden will be again on the citizens because it's a serious burden, quite a lot of money.
Thank you very much, Nadezhda, for interesting question. This is really worries a lot of economists who study Uzbekistan, both here and abroad. So our national debt is, you know, over. I didn't check today, but around $27 billion foreign debt. And this foreign debt is growing because mainly because of the pandemic. And Uzbekistan has been borrowing from international financial institutions to alleviate the effect of the pandemic on the national economy. Having said that, Uzbekistan's foreign currency reserves and gold reserves are in to pay off the whole debt in full right away, right? So we have, you know, we are lucky in the Central Asia. We are lucky that Uzbekistan is the most resource-rich country in many ways, especially gold, uranium, right? Uzbekistan produces around 80 tons of gold every year. And now during the pandemic, we are selling this gold, some of this gold, and covering the expenses. So to your question, yes, in the future, and already we feel that the increased taxes, you know, government is getting very creative in coming up with taxes. For example, we even have a tax for tinting the windows of our cars. You know, just your private car, if you just want to tint your black your windows, that's also a tax, because of course they call it a fee to have a comfortable car, because Uzbekistan is a very sunny country. We want a shade in our car. So if you want to have it tinted, you know, you have to pay government around more than $1,000, and it's annual fee. So, you know, government, you know, so that money is directed, some of that is directed to pay off that debt, you know, foreign debt. But we are not, our government debt is not at the point of default like it happened in 2000s, right? So we have, government has gathered enough hard currency reserves and gold reserves, which is the highest in the region. So if you look at the neighboring Kyrgyzstan, why it's happening, you know, in the recent UN address by Kyrgyz president, his main topic was sovereign debt, right? The debt of the country. And Kyrgyzstan came to the point because they're very poor country. They don't have a lot of natural. So they were coming to the point where they were going to default on this debt, mainly from China. And they asked for Chinese government and other governments, from which Russian government, for example, to delay the payments on their debt. And for example, China rejected. That's why we have now civil unrest.
And now I'm in a town 15 kilometers from Osh, which is one of the hot zones right now. I'm near the border, and I feel very safe. I have peace of mind. Uzbekistan shut down the border with Kyrgyzstan, but all these problems are, caused because excessive debt which the country cannot pay off, and that's why they were using. I'm guessing again. This is not open information yet. Government was using some of the citizens' hard currency reserves, in the banks to pay off, to service the debts, so they cannot return those savings, private savings, to the citizens now. That's why they have a bank run. They have a bank run in Kyrgyzstan. They have revolt. The current president, they don't know where he is. He's hiding.
Okay, Rahimov, according to the IMF statistics, more than 80 countries asked for the emergency fund from the IMF. So currently, another 30 countries are contacting the IMF for financial assistance from the IMF.
Right.
So there is another question in the chatting.
In the chat. Okay. Is that then what factors decide that one developing country may do better in terms of economy or finance than another developing country? All right. Thank you very much, Otabek, for your question. First of all, government policy, right? And right now, of course, current government of Uzbekistan is trying to fix some of the mistakes made by the previous government leaders. For example, privatization has become one of the primary goals of the economy. Privatization of the resources. So there is a saying that if you want to feed a person for a day, then give them a fish. But if you want to feed them for their lifetime, then teach them how to fish. So one question that economists raise is that who owns the lake? Who owns the rivers, right? So rivers and lakes, in a metaphorical sense, rivers and lakes are the economic resources which are currently owned mostly by government, right? State-owned enterprises, they control so many resources in Uzbekistan. For example, government has recently they let private mining in Uzbekistan for gold and precious metals. So this was only government monopoly before. And another thing that we discussed with Professor Bamaji and Professor An during their visit here, and when I visit Korea, we discussed that we lack the business ecosystem. We lack business ecosystems. Those angel investors, like in the developed countries. All these funds to support. For example, in South Korea, there is a practice that government guarantees for small business loans, right? So this kind of things. So we lack the government policy, infrastructure, and the ecosystem to realize all these economic opportunities that we have in Uzbekistan. Thank you, Otabek, for your interesting question. I hope I was able to answer your question. Gold mining. Well, Irina, yes and no. A very good question from Irina. Do you think that it is good to let privatize national resources like gold mining and etc.? I was actually strong supporter of laissez-faire, liberalism, just to let people manage the resources, privatization. But, if privatization happened before pandemic, we would already lose a lot of our resources. For example, Uzbekistan Airways would be already owned by some Saudi sheikh or some other multinational company, right? We would lose our national carrier, which happened to many other countries when they privatized their carriers. So we have to be very careful. I say that in developing countries, more important thing is not privatization. It is better corporate governance, better management practices. You know, for example, you know, Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines is fully government owned, but you know, they're #1 airline in Africa, and they fly. You know, they have more profit than all the African airlines combined. So being state-owned enterprise did not stop them from becoming very successful, right? So that's why government should be very careful in privatizing strategic assets, especially which are important for, like Uzbekistan Airways. We are double landlocked. So we need this airline for cargo, for transportation of resources. Irina, I hope I was able to answer your question. Thank you.
Yeah, one last questions.
Yes, please.
One last questions.
Are you so good at, you know, capturing everything I say, or am I so good at explaining things, or is it both? Yes, thank you, Irina. Maybe.
Okay, there is it seems that there's no more questions. So let us wrap up your sessions. A big hand. Give him a big hand to Rahimov.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll turn off, okay?